I thought I'd found paradise when I moved into Willowbrook Estates last September. This upscale community in suburban Atlanta promised tranquility, manicured lawns, and neighbors who minded their own business. What sold me wasn't just the pristine sidewalks or the charming gazebo at the entrance. It was the thought of finally having a safe place to park my pride and joy, a custom matte black Porsche 911 Turbo S that I'd spent 3 years saving for. That car wasn't just transportation. It was my meditation, and my reward for countless 60-hour work weeks at the consulting firm. And honestly, my way of proving to myself that all those sacrifices had been worth something. I never drove aggressively through the neighborhood. I never revved the engine before 8 in the morning or after 9 at night, and religiously kept my speed under 15 miles per hour within the community gates. I thought I was being the perfect neighbor. Apparently, I was wrong about what perfect meant to some people. The first sign of trouble came on a crisp Tuesday morning in October. I walked out to my car, travel mug of coffee in hand, ready for another day of client meetings downtown, when I spotted a folded piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. My initial thought was that maybe it was a welcome note from a neighbor, or perhaps information about an upcoming community event. Instead, what I found was a handwritten manifesto that would have made any reasonable person question the mental stability of its author. The note, written in aggressive block letters with a red pen, read, "Your vehicle is a menace to our peaceful community. It is excessively loud, intimidatingly fast, and completely inappropriate for a family neighborhood. Children are frightened by its presence, and residents feel unsafe. You have exactly 2 weeks to remove this threat from our streets before the Homeowners Association takes further action." It was signed simply, "Concerned Resident." And I had a pretty good idea who my mysterious pen pal was: Karen Mitchell, our self-appointed neighborhood watch commander and HOA president. I had made her feelings about my car crystal clear during our first and only interaction at the community barbecue 3 weeks earlier. That encounter had been awkward enough to stick in my memory. I'd been chatting with my next-door neighbor, Marcus, about the best pizza places in the area when Karen appeared seemingly out of nowhere, like she'd been summoned by the sound of normal human conversation. She introduced herself with the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes and immediately launched into what felt like an interrogation disguised as small talk. Where did I work? Was I planning to start a family soon? Did I understand the importance of maintaining property values? Then came the kicker. She noticed my car parked in my own driveway and wondered aloud if I'd considered something more family-friendly for the neighborhood. When I politely explained that I lived alone and enjoyed driving, her expression shifted to something I could only describe as barely contained hostility. She muttered something about priorities and responsibility before excusing herself to go lecture someone else about their lawn care routine. Marcus later confided that Karen had a talent for making new residents feel unwelcome if they didn't fit her vision of suburban perfection. Standing there with that ridiculous note in my hands, I couldn't help but laugh. The absurdity of someone demanding I get rid of a legally owned, properly insured, and responsibly driven vehicle was almost entertaining. I took a photo of the note and created a new folder on my phone called Karen Chronicles, figuring this would be a funny story to share with friends later. I honestly thought that would be the end of it. How wrong I was. Over the next 2 weeks, I noticed Karen's increased surveillance of my daily routine. She'd appear at her front window whenever I left for work, timing my departure like she was conducting some kind of scientific study. She'd be watering her flower beds whenever I returned home, always positioned for maximum visibility of my driveway. I even caught her taking photos of my car with her phone one evening, though she pretended to be capturing the sunset when I waved. The whole situation felt surreal, like I was living in some bizarre social experiment about suburban territorialism and middle-aged entitlement. The morning of day 15 dawned crisp and clear. One of those perfect autumn days that makes you grateful to live in Georgia. I had an early client presentation that day, so I was up before sunrise, moving through my usual routine of coffee, quick breakfast, and checking emails before heading out. I stepped onto my front porch, travel mug in hand, and froze. Where my beautiful Porsche should have been sitting safely in my driveway, there was instead what looked like the aftermath of a demolition derby. Every single window had been smashed. The paint was stripped down to bare metal in long, angry gouges. All 4 tires were slashed so severely that the rims were sitting on the pavement, and the interior had been shredded like someone had gone at it with garden shears. The first thought wasn't anger or sadness. It was pure shock. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't random vandalism or a crime of opportunity. This was personal, methodical, and filled with rage. Oh my God. What happened? The voice belonged to Denise from 2 houses down, who was out walking her golden retriever and had noticed me standing motionless in my driveway. She approached cautiously, her dog pulling toward the wreckage with curiosity. "I can't believe someone would do this," she continued. But then her voice dropped to a whisper. "Actually, I need to tell you something. I saw Karen and that landscaping guy, Miguel, out here around 2 in the morning last night. I thought it was weird that they were doing yard work so late. But now," she trailed off, was looking genuinely disturbed. "I asked her if she'd called the police or at least taken note of what time this happened. I thought about it," she admitted. "But I didn't want to cause trouble over what might have been nothing. I mean, Karen's always doing something dramatic. But this," she gestured helplessly at the destroyed car, "this is insane." The strangest part was my reaction. Instead of screaming or crying or flying into a rage like a normal person might, I found myself smiling. Not a happy smile. The kind of smile that comes when you realize your opponent has just made a catastrophic tactical error. You see, Karen had no idea that I'd installed a high-definition security camera inside my porch light fixture 6 months earlier, after a string of package thefts in the neighborhood. The camera was virtually invisible, motion-activated, and captured everything in crystal-clear detail. I walked back into my house with deliberate calm, poured myself another cup of coffee, and pulled up the security footage on my laptop. What I saw was better than any courtroom drama I'd ever watched on television. There was Karen, exactly 1:47 in the morning, dressed in a floral robe and wielding a sledgehammer like she was auditioning for a horror movie. She wasn't sneaking around or trying to hide her identity. She was attacking my car with the kind of righteous fury usually reserved for slaying dragons or defending castles. The video was absolutely damning. Karen appeared on camera at 1:45, followed 2 minutes later by Miguel. He looked extremely uncomfortable but was apparently being paid enough to participate in this madness. For the next 37 minutes, he systematically destroyed every inch of my car. Karen handled the heavy demolition work, smashing windows and stripping paint with tools that she'd clearly brought specifically for this purpose. Miguel focused on the tires and interior, though you could see from his body language that he wanted to be anywhere else on Earth. The audio was clear enough to catch snippets of Karen's commentary as she worked arrogant show-off. "This'll teach him about community standards." And my personal favorite, "Nobody needs a car like this in a family neighborhood." She was so focused on her destructive mission that she never once looked up at the camera that was recording every criminal moment. I saved the footage to 3 different devices, uploaded it to cloud storage, and then called my attorney. James Rodriguez had handled my home purchase and was familiar with HOA regulation, and I could tell from his tone that this was his first case involving vehicular vigilantism. "Let me get this straight," he said after I'd explained the situation. "The HOA president destroyed your car because she thought it was inappropriate for the neighborhood." When I confirmed that yes, that was exactly what had happened, he was quiet for a long moment. "Well," he finally said, "this is either going to be the easiest case I've ever handled or the most bizarre. Probably both. Don't touch anything else. Don't talk to anyone except the police. And whatever you do, don't confront Karen directly. Let me handle this the right way." As I hung up the phone, I realized that Karen had just graduated from annoying neighbor to criminal defendant, and she had no idea that her life was about to become significantly more complicated. The police arrived within 30 minutes of my call, and I have to give credit to Officer Patricia Williams for maintaining her professional composure while watching the security footage. She viewed the entire 37-minute destruction sequence twice, taking notes and occasionally shaking her head in what appeared to be professional disbelief. "In 22 years on the force," she said, pausing the video at a particularly clear shot of Karen's face, "I've seen plenty of property destruction, but this level of premeditation is unusual for a neighborhood dispute. She brought her own tools, recruited an accomplice, and spent over half an hour methodically destroying your vehicle. This isn't a crime of passion. This is calculated vandalism." Officer Williams photographed the damage from multiple angles, collected samples of the paint chips and glass fragments, and took a detailed statement from Denise, who had finally worked up the courage to admit what she'd witnessed. The officer also noted that Karen had made no attempt to disguise her identity or conceal her action, which would make prosecution significantly easier. Meanwhile, Karen seemed to be operating under the delusion that she'd committed the perfect crime. I watched from my living room window as she emerged from her house around 9:30, dressed in her usual suburban uniform of designer athleisure and oversized sunglasses, apparently heading out for her morning errands. She walked to her white Range Rover, which was parked prominently in her circular driveway, and I swear she paused to admire the destruction she'd caused before driving away. The audacity was breathtaking. She'd spent the previous night committing felony vandalism and was now going about her daily routine like nothing had happened. I wondered if she was planning to attend the next HOA meeting and express sympathy for my unfortunate situation. Maybe even volunteer to help investigate this terrible crime that had befallen our peaceful community. The first cracks in Karen's confidence appeared around 11 o'clock when Officer Williams knocked on her front door. I wasn't close enough to hear the conversation, but I had a perfect view of Karen's body language as it progressed, from confident to confused to outright panicked. The officer was clearly showing her something on a tablet, probably screenshots from the security footage, because Karen's posture went from defensive to deflated in about 30 seconds. She started gesticulating wildly, pointing toward my house and then at her own property, apparently trying to explain why her actions were justified. Officer Williams remained calm and professional, occasionally nodding and taking notes, but it was clear that Karen's explanations weren't having the desired effect. When the officer handed Karen what appeared to be official paperwork, her knees actually buckled, and she had to grab onto her door frame for support. The HOA board went into full damage control mode by that afternoon. I received a formal email from the board secretary expressing their shock and dismay at the alleged actions of their president and assuring me that such behavior was completely contrary to the values and standards of Willowbrook Estates. The message was carefully worded to avoid admitting any organizational liability while still distancing the HOA from Karen's actions. Conspicuously absent from the email was any signature or statement from Karen herself. I learned later from Marcus that Karen had spent most of the day on the phone with her husband, who was apparently a corporate lawyer and was not pleased to discover that his wife had potentially exposed their family to significant financial liability over a neighborhood parking dispute. The conversation had been loud enough for Marcus to hear through their shared fence, and it hadn't sounded particularly supportive or understanding. By evening, the neighborhood grapevine was in full swing. Denise had apparently shared her witness account with several other residents, and word was spreading quickly about Karen's midnight demolition project. I received text messages from neighbors I'd barely spoken to, all expressing shock and offering support. Mrs. Patterson from across the street brought me homemade cookies and shared that she'd always thought Karen was a bit too intense about neighborhood management. Even the teenagers who lived at the end of the block stopped by to tell me they thought my car was sick and couldn't believe someone had destroyed it. The community that Karen claimed to be protecting was turning against her, and she seemed to be the only person who didn't realize it yet. As I sat on my porch that evening, watching the sun set over our supposedly peaceful neighborhood. I couldn't help but feel satisfied that justice was already beginning to take its course. The civil lawsuit phase began 3 weeks later, and by then I'd assembled what my attorney called the most comprehensive property destruction case he'd ever handled. We had high-definition video evidence, multiple witness statements, photographic documentation of the damage, and a clear paper trail of Karen's harassment leading up to the incident. The insurance adjuster had assessed the total damage at $287,000, which included not just the car's value, but also the cost of the custom modifications and the depreciation caused by the destruction. The attorney also filed for harassment damages, emotional distress, and legal fees, bringing the total claim to just over $400,000. Karen, meanwhile, had hired a lawyer who seemed to specialize in hopeless cases, probably because he was the only attorney willing to take on a client who'd been caught on camera committing the crime she was accused of. The deposition phase was particularly entertaining. Karen's lawyer had apparently advised her to claim that she was acting in the best interests of the community and that my car represented a genuine safety threat. When asked to provide evidence of this threat, she produced a manila folder containing blurry cell phone photos of my car, parked legally in various locations around the neighborhood. Her lawyer asked her to explain how a stationary vehicle posed a danger to anyone. "It's not about when it's parked," she insisted. "It's about the potential for speed. That engine is capable of going over 200 miles per hour. Do you know what would happen if someone lost control of that kind of power in a residential area?" My attorney calmly pointed out that by that logic, every vehicle capable of exceeding the speed limit should be banned from residential streets, including Karen's own Range Rover. The most damaging part of Karen's deposition came when she was asked about the HOA's authority to regulate vehicle ownership. She confidently stated that as HOA president, she had the responsibility to enforce community standards even when the official rules didn't explicitly address certain situations. When pressed to show where in the HOA bylaws this authority was granted, she admitted that it wasn't written down anywhere, but insisted that it was implied by her role as community leader. My attorney then introduced into evidence every email Karen had sent to the HOA mailing list over the past 2 years, highlighting her pattern of making unilateral decisions without board approval and her tendency to interpret the community rules in whatever way suited her current agenda. The picture that emerged was of someone who viewed the HOA presidency as a personal kingdom rather than a volunteer service position. Karen's attempts to justify her actions became increasingly desperate as the legal process continued. She claimed that my car was too loud, despite the fact that I had noise level measurements proving it was quieter than most standard vehicles. She argued that it was a temptation for teenagers to speed, though no teenager in the neighborhood had ever even sat in it, let alone driven it. She even suggested that the car's appearance was somehow traumatic for children, though she couldn't produce a single child or parent who had complained about it. Her most creative argument was that luxury vehicles created economic intimidation in the community, making other residents feel inadequate about their own cars. My attorney's response was simple. So your client destroyed a $300,000 car because she felt economically intimidated by it. Is that your defense? The breaking point came during Karen's third deposition when she was asked directly whether she had damaged my vehicle. Instead of denying it or pleading the Fifth Amendment, she looked straight at the camera and said, "I did what needed to be done to protect this community from an irresponsible owner who refused to listen to reason." Her own lawyer visibly cringed, and I watched him frantically scribbling notes that probably said something like, "Client just confessed on the record." My attorney didn't even need to follow up with additional questions. Karen had just provided a full confession to felony vandalism while simultaneously admitting that she'd acted unilaterally without any legal authority. As we left the deposition that day, her lawyer looked like a man who was already planning his withdrawal from the case. The final court hearing took place on a snowy Tuesday morning in January, and Karen arrived dressed like she was attending a business meeting rather than facing the consequences of her criminal behavior. She carried a leather portfolio and wore the kind of confident expression that suggested she still believed the judge would somehow validate her actions as righteous communities. I sat at the plaintiff's table with my attorney, watching Karen's last-ditch attempt to avoid responsibility for what she'd done. Her new lawyer, the third one she'd hired after the previous two had withdrawn from the case, had apparently decided that her best strategy was to paint her as a concerned community leader who had simply made an error in judgment while trying to protect her neighbors. The judge, the Honorable Margaret Chen, had clearly reviewed all the evidence in advance because she got straight to the point. Miss Mitchell, she began, you've admitted under oath that you deliberately destroyed the plaintiff's vehicle because you believed it was inappropriate for your neighborhood. You've also admitted that you had no legal authority to make this determination, and that the Homeowners Association rules contain no restrictions on vehicle ownership. Is that correct? Karen's lawyer started to object, but Karen interrupted him to answer directly. Your Honor, I was trying to preserve the peaceful nature of our community. That car was a symbol of everything wrong with modern society. Excessive wealth, a disregard for others, and the prioritization of personal pleasure over community welfare. The judge let Karen finish her speech, then calmly addressed the core legal issue. The evidence was overwhelming high-definition video of Karen committing the crime, her own confession during depositions, and witness testimony confirming her actions. The destruction was clearly premeditated, as evidenced by the tools she'd brought and the systematic nature of the damage. The financial impact was substantial and well documented by professional appraisers. Most importantly, Karen had acted without any legal authority and in clear violation of multiple criminal statutes. This court finds the defendant liable for all damages claimed by the plaintiff. Judge Chen declared, the total award is $412,000. Including punitive damages for the defendant's complete lack of remorse and her continued assertion that she was justified in her actions. Karen's reaction was immediate and dramatic. She stood up and shouted, "This is completely unfair. I was protecting families and children. Where's the justice for responsible homeowners?" The judge warned her about contempt of court. But Karen was beyond reason at that point. Her lawyer was frantically trying to get her to sit down and be quiet. But she continued ranting about community standards and property values until the bailiff stepped forward. It was a spectacular meltdown that provided the perfect ending to months of legal proceedings. As court security escorted Karen from the courtroom, she was still yelling about how the legal system was biased against people who tried to maintain neighborhood quality. The aftermath was swift and merciless. Karen was forced to sell her beloved Range Rover and take out a substantial loan against her house to pay the judgment. Her husband, apparently tired of being married to someone whose hobbies included felony vandalism, filed for divorce within 2 weeks of the court decision. The HOA board voted unanimously to remove her as president and banned her from holding any leadership position in the future. Miguel, the landscaper who'd helped her, was arrested and pleaded guilty to destruction of property in exchange for community service and restitution. As for me, I used part of the settlement money to purchase an even nicer car, a midnight blue McLaren that I had custom detailed with a small plaque on the dashboard reading, courtesy of Karen Mitchell. Every morning when I drive through Willowbrook Estates at exactly 10 miles per hour, I wave politely at Karen's house. She's never outside anymore, but I like to think she's watching from behind her curtains, contemplating the true cost of letting jealousy and entitlement override common sense and basic human decency.